My sister wanted the dress, the aisle, the attention, at my wedding. I'm writing this on my honeymoon, which sounds crazy, I know. But honestly, getting this all out feels therapeutic. And believe it or not, my husband is more hyped about me sharing this than the free drinks at our resort. He's actually the Reddit addict. But when I brought up writing it myself, he said, "It's your story. You should have the honor of telling it." He's right next to me now, reading over my shoulder like my biggest cheerleader/editor. Before we dive into the actual madness of my wedding day, I need to rewind. Because this kind of insanity doesn't just happen out of nowhere. You need the full picture to understand why things unfolded the way they did, and why we responded how we did. So let's go back. As far as I can remember, my parents always had a favorite, my sister. And no, I don't mean in the casual parents naturally gravitate toward one kid more kind of way. I mean blatant, painful favoritism. If she blamed me for something, didn't matter how ridiculous, I'd be punished. If I pointed fingers at her, even with proof, it either got brushed off, or they'd somehow find a way to scold me too. Even simple things like birthdays were lopsided. My birthday cake had to be her favorite flavor, every time. But on her birthday, she got whatever she wanted, no compromises. Our outings, gifts, praise, all tailored for her, even when the occasion was supposed to be mine. I was background noise to her main character energy. She treated me like a nuisance more than a sibling. At first, she just ignored me. But when we hit our teen years, things turned ugly. I don't know exactly what caused it, but at some point, she lost all her friends. Whether they ditched her or moved away, I honestly have no clue. Our relationship was never close enough for me to ask. But from that moment on, she started channeling her bitterness at me, full force. I was relatively social back then. I had friends, cousins I got along with, and a decent reputation at school, and she hated that. Suddenly, I was her enemy. She began spreading lies, accusing me and my friends of random things, and worse, my parents believed her every time. They started restricting who I could see, where I could go. The excuses changed constantly. Your friends are a bad influence. Why can't you be like your sister and stay home more? But the result was always the same. Isolation. What saved me, surprisingly, was my extended family. We all lived close by, and I adored my cousins. One time at a family gathering, they invited me to something, and I told them, with the blunt honesty of a child, I'm not allowed to have friends because my sister doesn't have any. That got back to the adults. And let's just say, my parents got ripped apart. Of course, they grounded me for lying, but something must have stuck. Because after that, I got a little more breathing room. Enough to hang out with family now and then. And interestingly, right around that time, my sister demanded to switch schools. My best guess? She was embarrassed that everyone now knew she had no social life. My parents, shocker, didn't hesitate to enroll her elsewhere, even though it was a pricier and farther option. But hey, she made new friends there. And with that power boost, her campaign against me continued in full force. Home was hell. Her friends would come over and mock me to my face. If I complained, my parents said I was too sensitive. I stopped inviting anyone over. It wasn't worth the risk of them being accused of stealing or being mistreated. The only people I could count on were my cousins. Thank God for them. Things hit a whole new low when I got my first boyfriend. Was hesitant to introduce him to my family, especially my sister. But my parents pushed for it. They said it was family tradition to meet serious boyfriends early on. And part of me thought maybe they'd surprise me and be supportive for once. Spoiler, they didn't. One day, while we were visiting, he pulled me aside, visibly uncomfortable. He told me my sister had come up to him, in a very revealing outfit, and started flirting. Hard. She batted her eyelashes, leaned in close, and talked trash about me. Said I was immature and boring, and she was way more fun. He immediately walked away and told me. I believed him instantly. I know that sounds bad, like I should have at least questioned it. But honestly, even back then, I knew exactly what she was capable of. And while I'd never say it out loud, there was another reason too. I just didn't think he'd be into her. It's not a looks thing. Okay, maybe it is a little. But more than that, it was the way she carried herself. My sister had always been used to getting what she wanted without working for it. She never developed any charm or tact, and it showed. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the one who had to earn every little scrap of affection or attention. It gave me a backbone she never had. Anyway, when I told my parents what happened, they didn't even let me finish. My sister had already beaten me to the punch, with a story that he had flirted with her, that she turned him down because she'd never hurt me like that. And of course, they believed her. No hesitation. I was told I had bad judgment, and that I shouldn't be dating at all. They made me break up with him. I tried to keep seeing him in secret, but eventually the pressure became too much, and the relationship fizzled. Then it happened again. I dated someone new. Same story. She came onto him. He turned her down. She accused him of inappropriate behavior, and I got blamed. Again. At this point, my parents decided the problem was me, that I was boy crazy and incapable of choosing decent men, so they restricted me even more. Curfews got tighter. I wasn't allowed out alone. Meanwhile, my sister got all the freedom in the world, and because I still refused to have a full-blown relationship but was okay with kissing or casual stuff, the rumors started flying around school. People called me names. They painted me as a tease. My reputation took a hit. But the one silver lining? None of that gossip ever reached my parents or sister. If it had, I'm sure they would have used it as another excuse to pile on. During all this chaos, my sister brought home a boyfriend of her own. My parents were ecstatic. They gushed over him, constantly comparing him to me. Why can't you bring someone like him home? Look how lucky your sister is. It was unbearable. Then one day, he just disappeared. No more visits. Suddenly, he was a snake who tricked their poor daughter. And just like that, they flipped the narrative without ever admitting they were wrong. The double standards only got worse. She got more spending money, more freedom, more praise. I got curfews, lectures, and constant suspicion. When I pointed it out, they told me it was because she was older and more responsible. But when I reached the same age, the goalposts moved. Now it was because I'd made too many poor choices. Choices, by the way, that were entirely based on their belief in her lies. Graduation was looming, and while most seniors were stressing over applications and essays, I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had zero expectations that my parents would help me with college. I knew, deep down, knew, they would find a way to make sure my sister got everything, and I'd be left with nothing. Still, I played along. When my sister got accepted to a mediocre college with no scholarships or awards, you'd think she got into Harvard based on how my parents acted. They threw her a party, took her shopping, promised to cover everything: tuition, rent, supplies, food. No hesitation. It was like watching a game show prize reveal. And then they came to talk to me. I'll never forget how casually my mom said it, like it was just a minor inconvenience. Since we're paying for your sister's education, we won't be able to afford college for you. Maybe you can work for a bit. Wait until she finishes, and then we'll see if we can help. I didn't react. Not the way they wanted, at least. I just nodded and said, okay, I understand. No tears, no arguing, no begging. She pushed harder, probably hoping I'd throw a fit so she could justify the decision. But I stayed calm, thanked her even. My dad tried the same spiel a day later. I gave him the same answer. See, I'd been preparing for this moment for years. I knew who they were. I stopped expecting anything from them a long time ago. While my sister went off to college, funded and celebrated, I had quietly been building my escape route. With no social life, I had plenty of time to study. I focused on my grades, my essays, and my applications. I didn't just hope for a scholarship. I needed one. And I got it. A full ride to a decent university. Nothing Ivy League, but solid. I had everything covered. Tuition, housing, even a meal plan. The moment I got the acceptance letter, I posted it on social media and tagged my parents in a thank you message. It was deliberate, calculated, because if I told them in private, they would have found a way to sabotage it. But publicly, they couldn't risk the backlash. For a moment, they acted proud, shared the post, commented with heart emojis. But I should have known better. It didn't take long before their tone changed. Suddenly, they were concerned. Said my sister, who was so much smarter than me, was struggling, and maybe I was making a mistake. That it was a dangerous path, that I wasn't ready. But it was too late. I was going. And they couldn't stop me. College became my freedom. I still called on holidays and visited occasionally, but I kept my distance. They weren't paying for anything, which made it easy to set boundaries. I avoided introducing them to anyone I dated. I knew better now. Meanwhile, my sister, she dropped out. No one talked about it, of course. There was no announcement, no family update. She just stopped going, moved back in with my parents rent-free, and got a job at the same company as my mom. They acted like it was a victory. Claimed she was too smart for college and was now gaining real-world experience. I didn't argue. What was the point? They still treated her like royalty. Meanwhile, I was the forgotten one, until I met my husband. That's when everything changed. Meeting him changed everything. He wasn't like anyone I had ever met. Not just because he was kind and smart and charming, though he was all of those things, but because he saw me. Not as someone's backup daughter, not as an afterthought. Just me. And somehow, in all of his chaos and confidence, he loved me. Where I was quiet and hesitant, he was bold and unfiltered. The kind of guy who didn't just fantasize about witty comebacks or elaborate revenge, he followed through. He was the one who suggested I write all of this down, said it would be cathartic, which I guess is true. So when we started talking seriously about marriage, we both agreed on one thing. The wedding didn't need to be a spectacle. Neither of us wanted to blow our savings on a single day. What we did want was a honeymoon in Europe. A real one, not just some quick weekend escape. Still, there was the question of where to hold the ceremony. His family was scattered across the country. Mine, unfortunately, was centralized in my hometown. Logistically, it made sense to do it there. Fewer travel costs, easier to manage the planning. And if we were going to have a wedding at all, we figured we might as well give both sides of the family a chance to attend. So we sent out the engagement announcements, followed by the save the dates. That's when my parents demanded to meet. Him, I'll admit. I hesitated. I had softened over time, started to convince myself that maybe things weren't as bad as I remembered. Distance can do that. It makes you forget the sharpness of certain wounds. But the second I told my fiancé, now husband, he looked like I had just announced the world was ending. His eyes lit up like I had handed him a mission. Finally, he said, rubbing his hands together. Let's meet the villains. He wasn't scared. He was thrilled. He even bought a tiny voice recorder, high quality, long battery, easy to hide in a jacket pocket. His plan wasn't just to meet them, it was to catch them in the act. He wanted to be prepared for whatever weird manipulation or accusations they might throw at him. But secretly, he was hoping for my sister to try something inappropriate just so he could shut her down and play the audio for the rest of the family. So I let him go. Alone. He strutted out the door like a man on a mission and returned hours later, buzzing with energy. "Babe," he said, practically vibrating, "you are not going to believe what they asked me." And I didn't. Not at first. He told me to listen to him before playing the recording, just so I wouldn't freak out prematurely. So I sat on the couch, clutching a throw pillow, and let him explain. Apparently, instead of flirting or throwing shade, my parents and sister had a proposal. One that still makes my skin crawl to this day. They offered to pay for our wedding. Generous, right? Except there was a condition. My sister would walk down the aisle, before me, in a white wedding dress, at my wedding, on my venue, with photos, with her own cake. All so she could have the experience of getting married before her younger sister. Their logic? It wasn't fair for me to marry first. I sat there stunned, trying to process the sheer audacity of it. My husband, however? Oh, he was grinning like he just won the lottery. "We're gonna ruin them," he whispered, eyes gleaming. He didn't lash out. He didn't argue. He simply told them he needed time to talk it over with me, and got the hell out before they saw the fire in his eyes. And that's where the planning began. We were going to say yes, and then we were going to make them regret it. We didn't waste time. As soon as he finished telling me every detail, with the recording safely backed up in 3 different cloud accounts just in case, we sat down and started brainstorming. We made a game out of it. A twisted, cathartic, revenge-filled game. At first, we went wild. Fake addresses, decoy venues, elaborate distractions to lure my sister across town while we got married in peace. One idea even involved sending her to a completely different state. But eventually, Reason, and his much more level-headed brother, reeled us back in. He reminded us that pulling something too dramatic could end in lawsuits, public scenes, even jail time if someone really pushed it. So we took a breath, scaled things back, and decided on something simple. No chaos, no lies, no decoys, just a locked door. We would let them believe they had won. We'd smile, nod, and act like everything was going according to plan. But when the moment came, security wouldn't let her through the door. That was it. That was the revenge. But the build-up, oh, that's where the fun began. My husband returned to my parents a few days later, all smiles and sheepish charm. Said he was so sorry, but I probably wouldn't go for the sister walking down the aisle thing. Said I was a little controlling and had a history of being paranoid with phones and messages because of past boyfriends. That last part, my idea. I wanted to be the controlling, paranoid villain in their eyes. It gave us cover. It gave him freedom. If I was always checking his messages, then obviously nothing about this little secret could be written down. So they didn't write anything, not one message, not one email. All communication happened in person, all while he continued to check in and coordinate with them. Every week, we had full control, and they had no idea. My sister, for her part, was ecstatic. According to my husband, she literally skipped around their house when she heard the news. Skipped, like she had just been crowned prom queen. We let them pick everything they wanted. Well, almost. For the color palette and music, I stood my ground. But for the rest, we let them win. When it came time to choose the drinks and food, we picked the second lowest priced options. Then my husband, playing the loving future, son-in-law would secretly bring my sister back to the venue for a private tasting. He'd sigh and tell her how sad it was we weren't getting the best package. You know, because we didn't want to abuse her parents' generosity. Cue her marching back to them and demanding they upgrade us to the most expensive option. I always did. We repeated this trick for flowers, photography, lighting, even the freaking chairs. Every time, my sister thought she was stealing something from me, taking it out from under my nose. She never realized I had handed it to her with a grin. The best part? They were paying for it all. Thousands of dollars for a wedding we never really wanted. All because they thought it would buy my humiliation. Instead, it bought my freedom. And my husband? He was thriving. This man who usually loathes errands and formal events was suddenly volunteering for every meeting, every tasting, every venue check. He kept calling it emotional restitution. For the years they made my life hell, and I just kept watching it all unfold, like some twisted rom-com where the villain accidentally bankrolls the hero's happy ending. Everything was falling into place, but there was one hiccup we didn't anticipate: the dress. My mother, in her infinite gall, decided I should wear a gown she picked out. And of course, it wasn't even ugly. It just wasn't me. It was heavy, traditional, and stiff. The kind of thing that might have suited a 1980s debutante ball. Really not what I'd envisioned walking down the aisle in. We had planned to nod politely, accept whatever they chose, and then quietly wear what I actually wanted on the big day. But then my mom texted me about it. That was a problem. If I agreed in writing and wore something else, they'd have proof I lied. They could show it to the rest of the family. They could spin it as betrayal. So I refused, over text. I said the dress wasn't my style and I'd rather find something that felt more personal. I kept it polite, firm, emotionless. Cue the tantrum. Suddenly, I was ungrateful. My mother claimed I was turning my nose up at her generosity. My sister started suggesting that maybe my precious dress should mysteriously go missing, or even get ruined. My husband, ever the actor, pretended to agree. He even offered to take care of it. And he did, in the best way possible. We saved a bit of fabric from my actual dress during alterations, just enough to make it look real. My husband took that swatch to my parents' house, claimed it was what was left after destroying the gown, and told them I was now too heartbroken to talk about it. They bought it. He said he had to rush back to calm me down and keep the wedding on track. They ate it up, All the while, I was curled up on our couch, sipping tea, and watching sitcom reruns with a huge grin on my face. Meanwhile, my sister was messaging my husband on the side, trying to flirt again. Yes, again. And again, he acted conflicted, like a man torn between duty and desire. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. Every time she tried to push the line, he'd dangle just enough false hope to keep her dancing. Meanwhile, we kept deepening their belief that I was an overbearing fiancé, checking his phone constantly. That ruse worked like a charm. It gave us total insulation. They never dared to write a single incriminating thing down. Not a peep. All while we stored everything on our end. Recordings, screenshots, receipts. As the wedding neared, our confidence grew. We weren't just playing defense anymore. We were orchestrating the entire event like a pair of criminal masterminds with matching rings and a honeymoon countdown. And you know what? It was fun. After years of being cornered, silenced, and walked over by my family, I was finally in control. That girl who used to cry behind closed doors every time her parents compared her to her sister? She was gone. In her place was a bride who was about to serve the coldest dish of all, justice, plated with white roses and a champagne toast. And they had no idea what was coming. With every moving part now in motion, all that remained was executing the finale. We had laid the groundwork. Months of manipulation, carefully planted lies, and acting worthy of an award show had brought us to the threshold of our wedding day. Now, we just had to let the trap snap shut. The plan, according to them, was straightforward. My sister would arrive at the ceremony just before me. The timing was crucial. She would walk down the aisle wearing a wedding dress before I appeared, claiming the moment for herself. The logic was, by the time I found out, it would be too late to stop. I'd either cave to the pressure of the crowd or explode in front of everyone, giving them the perfect opportunity to paint me as dramatic, unstable, or selfish. They thought they had this down to a science. But what they didn't know was that we had already taken their script and rewritten the ending. We had security, real security, hired and briefed to act professional, courteous, and absolutely immovable when it came to our one instruction: do not let my sister into the venue. 2. Keep it subtle. We stationed our first line of defense discreetly. Just a woman with a clipboard at the front gate checking names. Totally normal. Nothing suspicious. But once my parents were seated, we rolled out the real muscle. A bodyguard type. Stoic. Intimidating, but not in your face. The kind of presence that doesn't need to raise his voice to make people back off. We tipped him well, promised even more if things got messy, and made sure he knew exactly what was at stake. And let me tell you, this guy was a pro. On their end, everything was proceeding like clockwork. Bridesmaids were told to follow my dad's cue, no questions asked. He'd stand at the entrance, and when my sister arrived, he'd signal them to begin the music. She would walk, the doors would open, the show would start, and I would be sidelined, except I was already in the building, dressed, ready, waiting with our carefully chosen point person, a friend of my husband's who had one job: send me out at the perfect moment. She wasn't in the bridal party, just a guest. Someone no one would suspect of being in on the plan. The music began. My dad took his place at the entrance, like he was about to escort the real bride. But when the doors opened, it was me, dressed in the gown they thought had been ruined, arm in arm with my husband's father, who had been on standby the entire time in case my own father decided to flake, which of course he did. The shock on his face was exactly what we were hoping for. He looked behind me, panicked, probably expecting to see my sister charging down the hall. But we had timed it perfectly. She hadn't even reached the gate yet. And then his phone rang. It was her. He mumbled something about an emergency and left me standing there at the threshold of my own wedding. I was alone, but not for long. My husband's friend, the same one who had texted me when to walk, stepped forward and asked loudly, "What did he mean by, 'You're not supposed to be here'?" That was our signal. She bolted toward the entrance, playing her part to a T, screaming, demanding answers, drawing a crowd. It created the perfect distraction. Inside, whispers filled the air. Guests looked around, confused. Some craned their necks toward the door. Others pulled out phones, murmuring theories, but I walked down the aisle, head held high. With each step, I felt years of mistreatment peel away like dead skin. The lies, the favoritism, the gaslighting, all of it falling behind me like the train of my dress. And at the end of that aisle stood my husband, the man who had helped me pull off the most poetic revenge my family could never have seen coming. He whispered as I reached him, "You look stunning. And your dad just abandoned you for a tantrum-throwing wannabe bride. We're gonna be legends." I smiled, because this wasn't just a wedding. It was the final chapter of a story that had begun the day I was born into a family that never wanted me to shine. And now, I was glowing. The morning of the wedding, the air felt unusually calm, almost deceptive in its stillness. Guests were already beginning to arrive, smiling, greeting, taking in the decor, the soft music, the floral arrangements that had, unbeknownst to them, been selected through months of quiet manipulation. On the surface, everything looked like any other elegant wedding, but beneath it all, there was a storm brewing, a secret only a few of us were in on. We had security stationed at the front, dressed subtly but with presence. To most guests, they looked like regular venue staff. Only those with a specific task knew the truth. They were there for one reason only: to make sure my sister didn't step one foot inside. Our primary security guard, a large man with a no-nonsense expression, had a very simple instruction. If a second woman showed up in a wedding dress, turn her away, firmly but politely, and never mention our names. And, of course, to make it even more airtight, we offered him a generous tip in advance. He knew exactly what to expect and what to do. He was calm, professional, and frankly seemed amused by the absurdity of it all. We had also enlisted the help of one of my husband's friends, someone who wasn't part of the bridal party, but who had an important job. She was our distraction, our signal, and our eyes at the gate. Meanwhile, my husband and I kept to the plan. The bridesmaids were told to begin walking once my father gave the signal. He was under the impression that I'd be delayed on purpose, allowing my sister to slip in and grace the aisle first. Of course, none of them realized I was already fully dressed, waiting just out of sight, ready to reclaim what was mine. Soon as my father walked to the entrance and cued the procession, our friend texted me that everything was going according to schedule. The bridesmaids made their way down the aisle, and then my father stood at the entryway, preparing for what he assumed would be a grand reveal. Just not the one we had in mind. The music swelled, the doors opened, and I stepped forward. The reaction on his face was immediate but not explosive. He didn't shout or throw a fit. Instead, he froze, trying to compute what he was seeing. I could almost see the gears turning in his head as he tried to make sense of what had gone wrong. He glanced past me, as if hoping my sister would appear behind, like this was some sort of mix-up. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, looked at the screen. I recognized my sister's name on the caller ID, and without a word, he turned and walked away. He didn't offer his arm, didn't whisper an excuse, didn't even look back. He left me standing there alone at the entrance. There was a ripple of confusion across the room. Some guests shifted in their seats, unsure if they had missed something. A few murmured quietly, eyes darting from me to the entrance, as though waiting for a punchline. Then, just as planned, our friend, the one we had positioned for this exact moment, stood up from her seat and asked, loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "Why would he say this wasn't supposed to be you?" The timing was perfect. It wasn't hysterical, it wasn't over the top, just confused enough to make it believable, but pointed enough to plant the question in everyone's mind. She turned and hurried toward the entrance, saying she'd go check what was happening. That was the cue for the second phase. She would confront the chaos outside, keep my parents distracted, and, most importantly, delay anyone from returning to the ceremony and trying to stop it. At that moment, standing at the start of the aisle, I felt an unexpected wave of emotion. Even though I knew what we had planned, even though I had rehearsed this mentally 100 times, there was a sting I hadn't anticipated. Part of me had still clung to the hope that they wouldn't go through with it, that it had all been a bluff, that my father wouldn't abandon me at the start of the most important walk of my life. But he had. That hope, fragile as it was, shattered in an instant. Still, before I could lose my composure entirely, another figure stepped forward. It was my husband's father. He had been seated closer to the aisle and, seeing what happened, didn't hesitate. He came to my side, gently offered his arm, and gave me a reassuring nod. With my head held high and surrounded by whispers I no longer feared, I walked toward the altar. And with every step, I felt lighter. Because for the first time, this was my story. As I walked down the aisle on my uncle's arm, every step a quiet rebellion against years of being sidelined. The real drama was unfolding just beyond the gates. My sister had arrived. According to the plan she believed in, she was meant to enter right after my father gave the cue. She had been instructed to wait in the car, already dressed in white, until the venue was filled, the music swelled, and the doors opened for her moment of glory. But that moment never came. Instead, she stepped out of the car in her ivory gown, one she had selected to resemble mine based on scraps my husband had accidentally shown her, and was immediately greeted by a stone-faced man in black. The security guard stood firm, clipboard in hand, and asked for her name. Confused, my sister told him she was the bride. He paused, glanced at the list, and shook his head. "Sorry, the bride is already inside. You're not on this list." That's when the first crack in her perfect day appeared. She insisted, louder this time, that there had been a mistake. She was told she'd walk first, that the wedding hadn't started yet, that the groom had arranged it all, but the guard held his ground, calm and professional. "Miss, if you're here for a wedding, you must be at the wrong venue. There's already a ceremony underway, and the bride's inside." From the way it was later described to me, she tried everything, begging, yelling, even threatening. Her voice reportedly echoed down the street, shrill with disbelief. Then my dad stormed over. He demanded the guard step aside, claimed he'd never seen him before, and accused him of impersonating staff. But the man simply pointed to his badge and contract, signed by us, and asked if they'd like him to call the police to verify. That shut him up. Not because he believed the guard, but because he realized this was no coincidence. Something had gone very, very wrong, and they weren't the ones in control. And right then, our friend, the one we had sent to investigate, arrived on cue. She immediately recognized my sister and let out a gasp that could have earned her an Oscar. "Oh my God," she said, staring at the gown. "What are you doing?" My sister tried to defend herself, claiming this was the arrangement, but the friend wasn't backing down. "You're here to walk down her aisle? In a wedding dress? Are you serious right now?" By this point, other guests were filtering outside, having noticed the commotion. Whispers turned into accusations. Shock turned into outrage. And all three, my parents and my sister, stood at the center of it, surrounded by people demanding answers. In a last-ditch effort to salvage the story, they turned to their only Defense, my husband. He agreed to this, they said. He promised, he planned everything with us, so they called for him. And when he emerged, cool as ever, he played the part perfectly. He didn't shout, he didn't gloat. He looked confused, genuinely baffled, then concerned. He furrowed his brow, looked between my parents and sister, and asked quietly, "What on earth are you talking about?" They pushed. They insisted. They said he had arranged this, that he had been the one reassuring them, but he gave them nothing. "I never agreed to any of this," he said. "Why would I? What kind of person would ask their fiancé's sister to walk down the aisle before her? In a wedding dress? Do you hear how insane that sounds?" And when they demanded to know why he told them not to write anything down, he just laughed. The kind of short, incredulous laugh that turns an accusation into a joke. "That's your proof? That I told you to keep it secret? Come on. You want to ruin her day, and now you're trying to pin it on me?" People started to side with him immediately. It wasn't just what he said. It was how. He sounded measured, hurt, but not defensive. He made them look like they were grasping at straws, desperate to spin a story that had already unraveled. My sister, sensing the tide had turned, began to unravel herself. At first she tried crying, then screaming. At one point she reportedly sat down on the pavement in her full gown, sobbing and pounding her fists like a child mid-tantrum. My mother tried to comfort her, but even she looked exhausted. My dad was red-faced, pacing, trying to explain that all they wanted was for both daughters to be celebrated. But it was too late. No one was buying it. They had spent years covering for each other, protecting my sister, making excuses, rewriting history. But now, under the eyes of extended family, old friends, distant cousins, and people who had watched us grow up, the truth stood naked, and it was ugly. Eventually, the venue staff asked them to leave, not with shouting or threats, just calm insistence. There was a wedding underway, and they were no longer welcome. Reluctantly, my father pulled my sister to her feet. She tried to dig her heels in, sobbing that she had been tricked, that she was humiliated, that it wasn't supposed to happen like this. But none of that mattered anymore. They were escorted away, not forcibly, but firmly, and the doors were closed behind them. Back inside, the ceremony continued. No one told me what had happened right away, though I could tell something had gone down. Some guests were visibly rattled, others kept glancing toward the entrance. But my husband leaned in and whispered, "It's done. They're gone. You made it." And in that moment, I truly believed him. For once, the story wasn't hers to steal. It was mine. The rest of the ceremony went on like a dream. And not just because we finally got to exchange vows without the looming shadow of sabotage. It was because something had shifted. For once, I wasn't the girl pushed to the side, ignored in favor of someone louder, needier, or more dramatic. For once, I was the center of the story. Even the air felt different. Lighter. Freer. After we were pronounced husband and wife, we walked back down that aisle, the same one my sister had once believed would be her stage, and emerged into the reception with cheers, applause, and faces that, for the first time in a long time, were only happy for me. No sideways glances, no subtle digs, no questions about my sister. Just joy. But of course, it didn't take long for the questions to start simmering beneath the surface. People began trickling back in after stepping outside to witness the scene unfold. Some were red-faced from arguing. Others looked stunned, and a few seemed downright entertained. Still, no one approached me about it directly. Whether out of respect, shock, or an unspoken agreement to let the bride have her piece, I'm not sure. But I appreciated it. My husband kept the act up for a little while longer, maintaining a tight jaw, furrowed brows, pretending to be upset about what they had done. But I could see the flickers of pride he was fighting to hide. He was loving every second of the chaos we had orchestrated, and he deserved to. This was his masterpiece, after all. Eventually, when the crowd loosened and the drinks started flowing, he leaned in with a low chuckle and said, "You have no idea what happened out there." I didn't ask yet. I wanted to soak in this peace just a little longer. The peace of knowing the plan had worked, the peace of seeing people celebrate me. But later that night, when we were finally alone, just the two of us in our hotel suite, still half-dressed and high on adrenaline, he told me everything. He painted the whole picture. My sister showing up in a full bridal gown, makeup done, hair curled, expecting applause. The way her jaw clenched when the guard told her she wasn't on the list. The yelling. The insistence that she was the real bride. The moment she realized she'd been played, not by me, but by someone she thought she could manipulate. And then the meltdown. He told me how she'd thrown herself to the pavement, shrieking about betrayal and humiliation, while her parents tried to salvage their dignity and explain the unexplainable. And how they all, eventually, had to leave through the same doors they thought they'd be grandly entering. I listened in stunned silence. Somewhere between disbelief and awe, it had actually happened. The thing we'd planned. The revenge we dared to dream up. It wasn't just fantasy. It was real. And we had pulled it off perfectly. As we sipped champagne and stared out at the city lights, my husband finally broke character. He let go of the faux frustration, the manufactured anger, and just beamed. "I've never been prouder," he said, raising his glass. "To you, to us, and to the biggest karmic slap they'll ever receive." I couldn't stop smiling. Not because of the dress, or the party, or even the ring on my finger, but because, for once, I had reclaimed my narrative. I wasn't the quiet daughter, the overlooked sister, or the family scapegoat. I was the woman who stood up, with the help of the only person who ever truly had my back, and said, "Not this time." And just when I thought the drama had ended there, my husband reminded me this was only the beginning, because back at the venue, while we were dancing and laughing and soaking up every second of joy, my parents and sister had been trying to rewrite the story once again. They began messaging him, messaging me, calling, pleading, accusing, blaming, doing anything they could to regain control of the narrative they had just lost so spectacularly. But this time, we didn't stay silent. He took screenshots of everything. The missed calls, the frantic messages, the wild accusations, and the sudden backpedaling. He gathered it all like evidence, calm and methodical. Then he dropped it, all of it, into the family group chat. No warning, no explanation, just the truth. In its rawest form, he added a single message, please help. They're now trying to ruin our honeymoon after ruining our wedding. We need your support. And for everyone's sake, do not share our location. The last thing we need is them showing up here, claiming I promised to pretend to sleep with her. 2. The reactions were swift. Some family members were outraged. Others sent supportive messages. A few shared their own stories, quiet confessions of how they had seen the favoritism for years but never wanted to interfere. Some even apologized for not stepping in sooner, but the one thing they all shared was disbelief. Disbelief that our parents and my sister had actually tried to turn my wedding into someone else's fairy tale, and failed so spectacularly. And with that, the silence finally fell. No more calls, no more texts, no more attempts to spin the story. They were done, at least for now. And as I lay next to my husband, half buried in hotel sheets and laughter, I realized something I never expected. I felt whole, not because they were gone, but because they no longer defined me. I wasn't their afterthought. I wasn't the footnote in someone else's story. I was the author now, and my next chapter was already off to the perfect start. Our honeymoon was everything we dreamed it would be. Sunrise breakfasts on the balcony, lazy afternoons exploring cobbled streets, nights wrapped in soft sheets, and even softer laughter. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't checking my phone in fear of what drama might be waiting. I wasn't flinching at the sound of a message. There were no messages. After the group chat bomb my husband dropped, they went completely silent. No more attempts to salvage their image, no carefully constructed lies, no frantic denials or twisted logic. Just nothing. At first, I waited for something. A last-minute tantrum, a guilt-laced letter, a desperate plea disguised as reconciliation, but it never came. And that was the best gift they could have given me. Complete and utter silence. It gave me space. Space to breathe. Space to reflect. Space to finally hear myself without their voices crowding my thoughts. And in that space, something unexpected happened. I laughed more. I slept better. I opened up in ways I didn't know I had kept closed. My husband and I would spend hours just walking and talking, not about the wedding or the drama or the mess we'd left behind, but about the life we wanted to build. It was the kind of peace I didn't even know existed. We didn't post much. We didn't reach out to anyone. We let the silence linger, let the absence of noise become a healing balm. And every time I thought back to what had happened, it didn't sting. It didn't make me question if I'd done the right thing. If anything, I felt even more certain. We hadn't just stopped them from ruining our wedding. We had stopped them from writing another chapter in a book they never should have had the pen for. For the first time, I understood what closure really meant. It wasn't a final conversation. It wasn't mutual understanding. It wasn't even an apology. It was the quiet. The moment when you finally step away from the chaos and realize you don't need them to feel whole. I used to think forgiveness was something I owed, that I couldn't move forward unless I found it in myself to make peace with what they'd done. But sitting there in that sunlit room, listening to the waves crash beyond the window, I realized I didn't need to forgive them to be free. I just needed to stop giving them space in my life. And so I did. There were no grand declarations, no social media posts, no announcements to distant relatives or family friends, just a simple decision. That the people who had hurt me for years, who had stolen my voice, who tried to rewrite my wedding into my sister's fantasy, didn't get to follow me into the next chapter. And as our honeymoon came to a close, I felt lighter than I ever had. Not because the trip was ending, but because the weight I'd carried for so long wasn't coming home with me. I was returning not as a daughter desperate for approval, or a sister clinging to hope, but as a wife, a partner, a woman who had finally reclaimed her story. And that story, I knew now, was only just beginning. It's strange, sitting here weeks later, knowing that the chaos we braved is now just a memory, one we own, not one that owns us. In the days after the honeymoon, I expected something. Maybe an apology dressed in half-truths. Maybe one last desperate guilt trip. Maybe silence that would eventually crack. But nothing came. And that silence remained. Cold, deliberate, final. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with it. A part of me still flinched when I saw my phone light up. My heart still raced when a number I didn't recognize called. It's hard to unlearn years of anticipating disappointment. But then, nothing happened. Just life. And life was good. People who had attended the wedding started reaching out. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, old friends who had seen the fallout firsthand, even some distant relatives who'd only heard about what happened. Secondhand, but called just to say, "We believe you. We're proud of you." For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being doubted. I wasn't the girl who cried wolf. I was the bride whose strength finally spoke louder than the lies told about her. My parents haven't tried to call again. My sister hasn't messaged. But my extended family has stepped into that silence with kindness I never expected. One aunt sent us a handmade quilt as a belated wedding gift, saying, "For warmth and new beginnings." Another cousin offered to host us if we ever visited their city. My world had narrowed for so long I hadn't realized how many doors could open once I closed the ones that hurt me. And as for me and my husband, we're just happy. We still joke about the wedding, about how I should win an award for best performance by a bride in emotional turmoil. He still grins every time someone calls him a legend for orchestrating the greatest family heist of the year. And we've framed one of the photos from the wedding. Not the formal ones, but the candid moment when we're laughing so hard we can barely stand. That's the one that feels like truth. There are moments when I think about what could have been. If I'd never met him, if he hadn't believed me, if I'd let guilt and habit drag me into another round of sacrifice. But that's not the story I tell now. The story I tell now is about a girl who grew up unseen, but who saw herself clearly, enough to break the cycle. A girl who thought strength looked like silence, until she learned that sometimes strength is the loudest, boldest kind of honesty. And a girl who, with the help of one very stubborn man, rewrote the ending to a tale that was never supposed to belong to her sister. If you've made it this far, maybe you're wondering why I chose to write all of this. I guess because, for most of my life, I thought I'd never be allowed to tell my story. Now I know that no one gets to decide that but me. And if you're reading this, if you've been the black sheep, the scapegoat, the forgotten one, let this be your reminder. Your story matters, your voice matters, and sometimes the best revenge is reclaiming the pen.
The case has been heard. The stories have been told. Now it's your turn to judge. Leave your verdict in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. The Court of Stories is always in session.